You're listening to Down to a Science, a Lanel podcast series.
It has been around 4 months since the film Oppenheimer released in theaters, creating a buzz in the public and grossing nearly $1 billion worldwide. After the war, Oppenheimer was a world-famous scientist that people recognized. Over time, that celebrity status faded, and even a year ago, Oppenheimer wasn't majorly known in the world, but has now once again become a recognizable name to the average person. The film, based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of Oppenheimer, American Prometheus, peeled back many layers of Oppenheimer's life and complex legacy. Was he a member of the Communist Party or was he not? Did he actually attempt murder by poisoning an apple? Was Oppenheimer as fearful of what they were creating as he was depicted? J. Robert Oppenheimer was the director for the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, the first director of Los Alamos National Laboratory, and helped orchestrate the realization of nuclear weapons on Earth. I'm your host, Joey Montoya, from Los Alamos National Laboratory, and today we're talking to Alan Carr, the historian at Los Alamos, about the film. What did it get right? What wasn't so accurate? Compiling a narrative such as Oppenheimer's into one film is a feat in itself due to the complexity of the story. So Alan, before we get into the film, why is Oppenheimer's legacy so complex?
I think as we consider Oppenheimer's legacy, maybe the thing that makes it most complex is just the nature of the man himself. He was a human being. And, like all of us, he had great attributes. He had maybe some negative attributes as well. He changed over time. He did some very remarkable things. And so when you put all these things together, couple that with his incredible intelligence and that he lived in a time that was really remarkable in terms of world history, put all those things together, and I think that it is, that's why you really do get this complexity, is just, again, the human aspect of his character and mixed with some just being at the forefront of so many things, like importing theoretical physics to the United States, the of course Project Y, the work at Los Alamos, the development of the H-bomb, all the politics that went along with this, McCarthyism, the Cold War, and again a man of who changed and evolved over time. It is difficult to pin Oppenheimer down, just because I think that you've got all of these other variables, all these complex variables feeding into a very complex psyche. Because Oppenheimer was responsible played a huge part, I should say, in introducing nuclear weapons to the world. He has that also feeds into this complex legacy, if you will. Are nuclear weapons a good thing or a lot of that depends on your vantage point. There's not simply a straight, yes, this is right, or no, this is wrong type of answer. A lot of this is subjective. So for instance, if you're a soldier that is, maybe preparing to invade Imperial Japan shortly before nuclear weapons are used, then, I think that you'll look at Oppenheimer and consider his legacy. And of course, that is at the center of his legacy. Think of it more as a positive thing. If you're somebody who survived one of the attacks on Hiroshima or Nagasaki, you might have a very different perspective on that. When it comes to things like deterrence, on the one hand, we've had many decades that have passed. The world's not seen another global war between the great powers. And I think that nuclear weapons are at least a significant variable in that. We could look at deterrence and say, this is something that has worked well, and it seems to have rendered global wars obsolete. On the other hand, you could look at the same issue and say, well, now mankind has the firepower to inflict irreversible damage on itself and on the planet. So again, looking back at Oppenheimer, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing?
Bringing such a complex historical story to the big screen can't be easy, and it's hard to imagine everything is perfectly precise. The book in which the film is based, again, American Prometheus, is widely accepted to be an accurate biography. What were some of the plot points that were not depicted accurately?
When we look at the movie, there was a lot that the movie got historically right. And, I'd emphasize that, it is a movie. It's not history. Christopher Nolan didn't get a time machine to go back in time. It is a representation of something that happened in the past, but made for entertainment, not necessarily made as something to totally accurately portray the past. But there were a lot of things that the movie got right. I thought one of my favorite parts, and maybe for many others as well, was the presentation of the Trinity test. That story, a lot of it, so much of the portrayal of Trinity, I think, is an accurate representation of what had happened, including the blast itself. I think that Christopher Nolan used a lot of, actually did not use a lot of CGI in trying to make that. And, you get different opinions on that. To me, I kind of liked going for a more organic feel. That kind of translated to me pretty well. So yeah, the presentation of Trinity I thought was very good. There are things, of course, that you can nitpick, this and that. One of my favorite parts within that Trinity sequence was that, there was silence. And that's one thing I think a lot of people don't realize. After the Trinity blast, there was silence. Now, actually, it was an extended silence in the movie. I think in reality, there was about, depending on where you were, 30 to 40 seconds of silence between when you first see the light and when you had the shockwave and the sound come through. And I liked what Christopher Nolan did with that, just to see this contemplation from Oppenheimer as it unfolded. That is something that actually happened again, is the gap there, if you will. A lot of the characters, this is another, I think that everyone I've talked with is in agreement that the acting was really spectacular. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the acting portrayals were accurate, but some that I thought were. For instance, I really liked Matt Damon's portrayal of General Groves, and I thought that it was pretty accurate. Now, I've had people fire back at me and say, well, he wasn't, if we can use the word, he was not rotund enough to be General Groves, and I think that is a fair critique. General Groves was a large man. The other one, though, is he wasn't mean enough to be General Groves. Now, on that one, I'll say this. General Groves was known for being pretty gruff. In the movie, he's generally pretty sensible. And I think that the reason why is that in reality, his relationship with J. Robert Oppenheimer was very professional to the point of being, truly cordial. I don't know if I would say the two were friends, were buddy-buddy, but they had a tremendous amount of respect for each other and interacted very well by all accounts that I've ever read. And so in the movie, General Groves spends most of his time with Oppenheimer, and so you see that reflected. He's not barking at Oppenheimer. They didn't have that kind of relationship. However, there are a couple of points in the movie that I think you see General Groves does have some bite to him. He gets mad at one of the scientists, for instance, and so you do get to see that side as well. But I thought that was a good portrayal. Cillian Murphy's portrayal of Oppenheimer I thought was very good as well. One of my favorite scenes in the movie was Kitty Oppenheimer's interrogation, if you will, during the Oppenheimer security hearing in 1954. Oppenheimer kind of got bulldozed, and you could read that in the transcript and get a sense of it. It's just really kind of cringeworthy to see what happened to him and his inability really to defend himself. On the other hand, Kitty Oppenheimer knew exactly what was going on, and she fought right back. And I thought in the movie there was kind of a really good condensed version of Kitty's defense of her husband there. It was a sympathetic portrayal of Kitty Oppenheimer overall, I would say, in my opinion. But in that regard, I thought that it was both sympathetic and accurate, and one of my favorites. So those are just a few of my favorite parts.
Given that a lot of characterizations were portrayed correctly, were there any that were not? What other plot points played out inaccurately?
There were several things in the film that were just not accurate when we look at the historical record. And when we consider why, I think that in some of the cases, it was just because it didn't work for a movie. For instance, one thing, and this may seem esoteric, but there's this story about possible, a nuclear weapon going off and possibly igniting the atmosphere and destroying the world. That question did come up. It was considered way back in 1942, several months before the laboratory before Los Alamos came into existence, by Oppenheimer and his colleagues. In the movie, Oppenheimer takes this very serious concern back to Albert Einstein. Now, one thing that's not historically accurate is that Einstein is really a major character in the movie, but he wasn't a major character in the history of the Manhattan Project. He just wasn't. And so Oppenheimer goes to see Einstein to ask him about calculations. Is this actually a possibility? That didn't happen. But what did happen is that Oppenheimer was gravely concerned initially about this, and he took his concern to Arthur Compton in Michigan. So Compton was a physicist. He was on holiday in Michigan. And my guess is that he doesn't go to see Compton in the movie because there's already like 100 characters in the movie, and here's one other character that you've got to introduce quickly, and, why not just go back to Einstein? So, again, that's historically just wrong.
At the beginning of the film, I was surprised to see Oppenheimer, as a college student, attempt to poison his professor with an apple. He left it on his desk for him to eat, but later came back to see Niels Bohr about to eat it. Oppenheimer snags it away before Bohr takes a bite. This point in the film is a controversial one, because he is being shown attempting murder.
One thing, and this plays also into the inaccuracy part. At the beginning of the film, you see that Oppenheimer poisons an apple, and that poisoned apple is almost eaten by Niels Bohr, who's also an important figure in the history, but also in the film. I don't think that there's good documentation to support that incident happened at all, but I do think that it is reflective of Oppenheimer, who was very insecure. That was a very challenging time in his life. A time, I would say, crisis. I think that that's a fair word to use. But I don't think that Oppenheimer's an attempted or committed attempted murder. A little bit more on that. When you look at the sources that were used for that story in American Prometheus, a couple of people who knew Oppenheimer were interviewed on that, 50 years after the fact. And of course, you can get information that's totally accurate 50 years later. But, you want to be very careful in how it's used. I believe that one of those interviews conceded that the apple may have been figurative. It may not have even existed. And that's kind of what I think happened. I don't think that it existed. There's no primary source documentation indicating that the poisoned apple affair happened.
Toward the end of the film, the bomb has been completed. Los Alamos' job seems to be complete. General Groves comes over and tells Oppenheimer, "We'll take it from here." Were Los Alamos scientists really pushed into the dark once they completed the bombs?
Now, I think that was done in the movie to kind of symbolize, as my friend Jim Konetka has put it. Jim is an author who's written many books on this topic as well, including The General and the Genius, about the Oppenheimer-Groves partnership. Jim's made this point in the past that, there was a moment when the scientists had lost control of what they had created. And I think there's something to that. It's not that cut and dry, but, I do think that is something that's valid to consider. And in the movie, I think it kind of takes that and it's reflected there. Oppenheimer's recruited this staff, built this laboratory. They put these bombs together. And just like that, he's powerless. He's not the director of anything anymore. The military has taken over. Well, so yeah, I get maybe why that was shown that way in the movie, but that just was not the reality. Oppenheimer had played a part in not only, of course, in the obvious things like designing and building nuclear weapons, but also in choosing their targets. The second of 3 targeting committee meetings had been in his office not long before that scene took place. He knew where these bombs were going, and probably better than almost anyone in the world knew what was going to happen when they exploded over the target cities. Those bombs, when you get the line, and I think the line in the movie was, "We'll take it from here." The military wouldn't have been taking anything anywhere if it had not been for the Los Alamos staff. The weapons were not sent as complete units. In reality, they were sent in pieces. Some of those pieces, many of the big, heavy pieces were sent aboard the USS Indianapolis. Now, that was a military operation. The Indianapolis, sadly, was sunk after delivering those components to the island Tinian, I think 800 or 900 sailors died in the aftermath as their ship was torpedoed. I think that is still, and let's hope it's never topped, the greatest disaster in the history of the United States Navy. Some of the nuclear components were flown by plane and escorted by Los Alamos staff members. On Tinian, you had, maybe a couple of dozen Los Alamos people who were there to receive all of these parts, to assemble the weapons, to get them to their targets. And so, for instance, you had Los Alamos people who flew both missions to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I knew some of them personally and well, including our third director, Harold Agnew, who flew the strike against Hiroshima and filmed it. Deke Parsons, who was one of only 2 associate directors at the laboratory during World War II. He armed Little Boy in flight on its way to Hiroshima. I knew Larry Johnston well. He was a good friend of mine, died many years ago. He's the only person who witnessed the first 3 nuclear detonations. He saw Trinity as well as Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that is, the laboratory is not given any credit for what happens next. Whether you think, the atomic bombings are right or wrong, these are 2 of the most significant events in history. And no, the military didn't just take it from there. We were partners with the military, just as the weapons program is still today as well.
Part of why Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked was because of his connections to the Communist Party. The film leaned on him having connections with the party, but not actually a member. History says otherwise.
In fact, I think that it's been shown from primary source documentation that Oppenheimer was a member of the party. It's been noted that, he was not a card-carrying, dues-paying member of the party. And I would say, in a sense, that's correct. But in the same sense, I would also say that that's because he was a special echelon of the party. He had contributed, I think in today's dollars, he had contributed maybe about $25,000 to the Communist Party in 1 year. He was not a member of the party for very long, but during one of those years, imagine, just writing a check for $25,000 to the Communist Party, or to at least organizations and causes that were friendly to the Communist Party. Can you imagine Communist Party of America going back to Oppenheimer and saying, hey, by the way, you owe us your $30 dues for this year, The other thing is that, like most rank-and-file card-carrying members of the party, they're going to get a call up and say, hey, we need you to join a picket line. We need you to be at a protest. We need you to do this or that. People like Oppenheimer, Hacken Chevalier, who was a very close friend of his and a professor of English at Berkeley, you're not going to take PhDs and have them join picket lines. They're too valuable an asset. You're not going to just have them a card and pay their dues and different things like that. Oppenheimer was a special asset within the Communist Party. He was treated as such. And I think that as you watch the film, if you consider, or you read Oppenheimer's hearing transcript or things like that, and consider that, people in the Communist Party considered, including Chevalier, considered him to be a member of the Communist Party, it does kind of put some of those things in a different light. Oppenheimer did, he's such an important part of our history at the laboratory, and rightfully so. He is, in a sense, the hero of Los Alamos. As I've called him before, he's our team mascot. But just like the rest of us, he was a human. He had things that he struggled with. And at various points in his life, he really did have some problems with integrity. Again, he was never transparent on his Communist Party membership. He lied to military intelligence, military security during World War II. They knew it at the time. But he did make up what he called, in 1954, when it was revealed to him that the government knew, he had made up a cock and bull story to try and protect his friend Chevalier. So there were integrity issues there. And I think that, again, over time, he changed, and that changed as well.
Oppenheimer's legacy is a complex web of brilliance, scandal, and terror. Some may see him as a hero, while others may see him as a villain. Do you think his legacy is largely misunderstood?
The legacy of Oppenheimer and of the nuclear era continues to unfold, and it's really just beginning. Although it has been, 70, 80 years since these events happened, we don't know what the future will bring. And you have a technology that can be used for all the good in the world to make it a safer and more sustainable place. But if misused, can also cause calamity the likes of which the world has never seen. So it really kind of just depends on which of these attributes you tend to place more value on in assessing Oppenheimer's legacy. So I wouldn't say that Oppenheimer's legacy is misunderstood so much as it is more just controversial depending on which aspect of that legacy you choose to focus in on.
Down to a Science is produced by Los Alamos National Laboratory. Your host, Joey Montoya. Special thanks to our guest, Alan Carr. Find out more about the laboratory and its mission at www.lanel.gov.